Welcome to part 3 of This Is Not a Conspiracy Theory, my 2020 documentary series. In this part, we get into the Red Scare and the JFK assassination and show how scientific concepts helped spawn conspiracy theories. In 1947, the psychologist B.F. Skinner performs an experiment. Pigeons are dispensed food at regular intervals and soon resort to repeating whatever they were doing when the food appeared. If they were pecking, they peck more. If they were turning in a circle, they turn in a circle more. And when food coincidentally appears, the pigeon thinks it's found a pattern, so it keeps repeating the same behavior in an effort to make more food appear. Skinner titles his paper, Superstition in the Pigeon. His experiment demonstrates one of the most fundamental activities of all animals, the search for patterns. Honeybees quickly learn the color and shapes of food-bearing flowers. Rats get through mazes faster and with fewer errors on each successive try. Dogs can learn countless patterns to earn rewards. But by far the most sophisticated detector of patterns is us, and unlike other animals, we can explain the patterns we find. Humans have an ability to form an abstract model of nature, a theory. During the Enlightenment, theory enabled us to comprehend Earth's position within the cosmos and the motion of the stars and the tides. We developed principles, hypotheses, and the greatest achievement of all, scientific theories. With theories, we could not only explain nature, we could predict its behavior. These achievements and the methods that produce them profoundly influenced the founders of the United States of America and then American culture as a whole. In many ways, we've all become scientists, observing the patterns that surround us and developing theories of varying quality to explain them. But unlike the early scientists, these patterns no longer come to us through the direct observation of nature. They come to us through media. In 1947, a pattern begins to form in the headlines of the nation's newspapers. The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, declares communism the foremost threat to American freedom. He calls communism an evil and malignant way of life, a disease that spreads like an epidemic. A frightening string of events confirms Hoover's claim. 10 suspected communists are fired from their jobs in the film industry and blacklisted. A spy codenamed Clever Girl reveals a network of communist spies. The Soviet Union detonates its first atomic bomb, years before it was thought possible. The Communist People's Republic of China is established in Beijing. Much of Asia and Europe are now under communist rule. Alger Hiss, a suspected spy, is convicted. Senator Richard Nixon gains national attention for his role in the case. Klaus Fuchs, a nuclear physicist with access to the secrets of the hydrogen bomb, confesses to spying. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are sentenced to death for transmitting atomic secrets to the Soviets. Communist North Korea invades South Korea, starting the Korean War. In the span of just a few years, an alarming new pattern becomes evident. America faces a formidable new enemy, and at stake in this conflict is complete annihilation.
The objective of communism at the outset was to establish itself as the only form of society on Earth.
The enemy is not just a nation, but an idea. And just as Hoover had claimed, it's spreading like a virus. Anyone might be infected. The era that will become known as the Red Scare has begun.
In the traditional motion picture story, the villains are usually defeated. The ending is a happy one. I can make no such promise for the picture you're about to watch.
You have seen communism in action. The same communism which is, at this instant, attempting to devour the world through subversion, revolution, deceit, sabotage, and vicious propaganda.
The secretive operations of communists will be combated by the secretive operations of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, which investigates national threats, and the recently formed CIA, which investigates international ones. and other battles are waged in public. An undistinguished politician from Wisconsin, Senator Joseph McCarthy, seizes the public imagination when he claims to have in his hand a list of 205 known communists working in the State Department. The number soon changes to 57, then 81. But despite his inconsistent and unsourced claims, McCarthy quickly becomes the most powerful public figure of his era. He leads an investigation into communist infiltration and makes countless accusations, targeting everyone from the Secretary of Defense, George C. Marshall, to the Overseas Library Program. McCarthy claims men high in this government are concerting to deliver us to disaster. This must be the product of a great conspiracy. Fears of communist conspiracy sweep the nation. Hollywood joins the anti-communist effort with propaganda films like I Was a Communist for the FBI, Big Jim McLean, and My Son John, in which a mother discovers her son has caught the communist virus.
Just because my son has been poisoned, I'll not let him infect other mothers' sons and daughters.
But after a few years of communist hysteria, a backlash begins to form. Arthur Miller, who had been investigated and convicted earlier, writes a play called The Crucible. He uses the spiraling hysteria of the Salem witch trials as an allegory for the McCarthy era. The play's message resonates so deeply, it's adapted into a major film over 40 years later.
I saw Goody Osborne with the devil! I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil! I saw Goody Howe with the devil! I saw Goody Barrow with the devil!
McCarthy's reign ends almost as quickly as it began. The pivotal events are broadcast through the new medium of television. As 1954 comes to an end, the Senate officially condemns him. The Red Scare slowly fades away. But fears of invasion and infiltration live on in the public imagination. In thousands of movie drive-ins, these anxieties take the form of UFOs and aliens. In Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Earth is invaded by alien plants that clone human victims and replace them with blank-faced replicants, much like communism assimilates its host.
They're here already! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next!
Serious authors begin to reveal other conspiratorial forces at work within American culture. In The Power Elite, C. Wright Mills argues that citizens are the unwitting pawns of military, corporate, and political leaders. In The Organization Man, William H. White warns of the conformity of thought produced within large corporations. In The Hidden Persuaders, Vance Packard reveals the psychological trickery advertising companies use to sell products. And based on stories from the Korean War, the new concept of brainwashing begins to circulate.
Shoot Bobby right through the forehead.
Yes, ma'am.
The suspicion that things are not as they appear grows. In TV shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, the real world is revealed to be the construct of unknowable forces.
Sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set.
Distrust spreads. Some members of the political left, who had been ostracized and actively oppressed during the Red Scare, suspect that a malignant conspiracy is being orchestrated by the government itself. And a shocking event will soon prove to them that this conspiracy is more vast, powerful, and pervasive than they had ever imagined. Everything is a Remix has the best shirts on the internet. We've got a brand new shop, new colors, new shipping, and lady styles. See the link below. In November of 1963, in Dallas, Texas, President John F. Kennedy is shot twice and dies.
3 bullet shots were heard to ring out. The president slumped into the lap of Mrs. Kennedy. Governor Connolly slumped into the bottom of the car.
Lee Harvey Oswald, a communist, is almost immediately identified as the assassin. But some members of the far left find it suspicious that Kennedy would be assassinated by a leftist while in Dallas, the hub of the far right. Rumors of conspiracy start to circulate. When just days later, the assassin himself is assassinated, perhaps silenced, conspiracy seems certain. The government counters rumors of conspiracy with a detailed report, 888 pages with 26 volumes of evidence and testimony. It becomes known as the Warren Report, and its claim is simple. The lone assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald, who was then murdered by another lone assassin, Jack Ruby. Its case hinges on a hypothesis, the single bullet theory. The report claims a single bullet caused all 7 injuries in 2 men. Thus, there was no second gunman and likely no conspiracy. The Warren Report is well received and trust in government peaks just after its publication. But in tiny, left-wing magazines, a small but dedicated band of amateur sleuths begins investigating the case for themselves. They refer to themselves as the Warren Report critics, but others call them conspiracy theorists. And they will utterly transform the public perception of the Kennedy assassination. Whether they know it or not, the critics' methods have been deeply influenced by the scientific ideas of the Enlightenment. Like early scientists, they too envision a mechanical world governed by rational laws with minimal randomness, coincidence, or error, a world of cause and effect, of equal and opposite reactions. They too believe this purposeful world is driven by intent. It is personal motives that unite seemingly unrelated events. They often cite the phrase "qui bono," meaning to whose benefit. And they too distrust the claims of authority and prefer examining the evidence themselves and drawing their own conclusions. But unlike early scientists, they have little direct evidence upon which to base their ideas. Instead, their evidence is media, and it's the patterns they find here that they seek to understand. The critics clip and file every article they can. Maggie Field, a housewife from California, lays them out and moves them around like chess pieces. The critics find a grand pattern of flaws, inconsistencies, and omissions, but they also find patterns in the tiniest details. Ray Marcus, a small businessman, studies still images of the film shot by Abraham Zapruder and notices that the president moves backward after the fatal headshot, indicating that the bullet actually came from the front. The lawyer Mark Lane goes on to say that in order to believe the single bullet theory, one must also believe that the laws of physics vacated in this instance. The argument against the single bullet theory is summarized decades later in the hit film JFK.
The magic bullet enters the president's back, headed downward at an angle of 17 degrees. It then moves upward in order to leave Kennedy's body from the front of his neck, where it turns right, then left, right, then left.
The critics begin to uncover evidence that contradicts the government's account of the crime. Harold Feldman, a writer and translator, finds 51 witnesses in the Warren Report who state they heard the shots come from the front, from the grassy knoll. David Lifton, an engineering student, finds a still image of the grassy knoll which shows bystanders running towards it in search of the gunman. On the knoll, he identifies what might be a gunman and a puff of smoke. Ray Marcus enlarges and magnifies this image to reveal 5 potential figures. One of them seemingly holds a gun. The director Michelangelo Antonioni later emulates Marcus's methods in the film Blow Up. Vincent Salandria, a Philadelphia lawyer, argues that the anomalies the critics have discovered are not bureaucratic stupidity or accident, but a uniform governmental pattern indicating guilt at the very highest echelons. The critics start to gain wide attention. 2 of their books become bestsellers. Some go beyond criticizing the Warren Report and develop their own theories. Richard Popkin, a philosophy professor, proposes that a second Oswald, an impersonator, was involved in the plot. Another philosophy professor, Josiah Thompson, studies the Zapruder film and theorizes that Kennedy was shot simultaneously from the front and the rear. The theories quickly multiply. Esquire magazine compiles 30 of them in a 1966 issue. The second story features 25 more. Public sentiment begins to shift. Mainstream publications like Life magazine and the Saturday Evening Post claim a new investigation into the assassination is necessary. In In 1967, the Warren Report critics are poised for their biggest breakthrough. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison starts a criminal investigation into the Kennedy murder.
There is no question as a result of our investigation that an element of the Central Intelligence Agency of our country killed John Kennedy, and that the present administration is concealing the fact.
Garrison claims to have evidence beyond the shadow of a doubt of a conspiracy, but his investigation soon turns bizarre. Garrison proposes countless conflicting theories. Witnesses are bribed, drugged, threatened. He discovers an encoded phone number by rearranging digits, changing a couple letters, then subtracting 1,300. The conspiracy Garrison envisions grows ever more grand and complicated. His wild, unsubstantiated allegations recall Joseph McCarthy. The jury quickly decides against Garrison, and his sensational failure drains the momentum of the Warren Report critics. The conspiracy movement returns to where it came from, the outskirts of culture. There are many other assassinations in the years that follow, and in 1968, Kennedy's brother Robert is shot and killed in the midst of his campaign for president. In the ensuing confusion, the country elects Richard Nixon, a politician who had first achieved fame during the Red Scare. During Nixon's reign, a new and startling pattern forms in the headlines. In June 1971, the Pentagon Papers are leaked by Daniel Ellsberg. The documents reveal that the Johnson administration had systematically lied about the Vietnam War. A few months later, the office of Ellsberg's psychiatrist is broken into. Then in 1972 comes a break-in at the headquarters of the Democratic Party, the Watergate complex. In 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew is charged with having accepted bribes and evaded taxes while he was governor of Maryland. Agnew resigns. In 1974, Nixon himself is implicated in the Watergate scandal and the Ellsberg break-in and soon resigns. Gerald Ford, who had never been elected president or vice president, takes office and then grants Nixon a full pardon. A string of other conspiracies are also revealed. A government experiment had studied African American men infected with syphilis while withholding diagnosis or treatment. The CIA had conspired to attempt to assassinate foreign leaders. The FBI had engaged in countless illegal operations like the blackmail of Martin Luther King. And an actual mind control program had subjected involuntary subjects to experiments with LSD. This new pattern makes a powerful and persuasive statement. The American government has been plotting against its own citizens. American anxieties turn inward, away from foreign enemies and toward American leadership. Trust in government drops below 50%. Cynicism floods popular culture.
Listen, you fuckers, you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore.
The films of the mid-70s are dark, distrustful, and defiant.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
The conspiratorial world of the Godfather films seems an analogy for the corruption, amorality, and ruthlessness of American leaders. Conspiracies become popular plot elements in many films.
You may think you know what you're dealing with, but believe me, you don't.
In The Stepford Wives, the conspirators are men. In The Parallax View, it's corporations. In Jaws, it's a small-town mayor. In The Conversation, it's some unknown entity. And in All the President's Men, the Nixon administration itself is even portrayed.
Protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
In the midst of all this, the greatest suspected conspiracy of them all again captures the public's imagination. The Zapruder film is shown publicly for the first time, and Americans finally see it played in real time.
And now, at the bottom of the screen, the headshot. That's the shot that blew off his head. It's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen.
They see for themselves the president being flung back and to the left. The revelations of recent years lend credibility to the Kennedy conspiracy theory.
The Pentagon Papers, Watergate, the CIA and the FBI engaged in illegal operations against American citizens.
In 1976, Congress initiates what the critics have long advocated, a new investigation. And as the 70s draw to a close, the new report is published. It chastises the FBI, the CIA, and the Warren Report authors for their handling of the case, but mostly it reinforces the findings of the original investigation and even makes new discoveries that further incriminate Oswald. But there is one extraordinary exception. Analysis of an audio recording of a police transmission reveals a fourth shot. The report states that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. The suspicions of the last decade are validated. The conspiracy theory seems a credible way to make sense of the vast complexity of the modern world, to reveal the hidden forces orchestrating events. But the failures of conspiratorial methods were already outnumbering the successes. And in other realms, the hidden forces being revealed were challenging the idea that anyone was in control.